Let's get started talking about the digital SAT. I'll start by just showing you guys some of the sort of basic things to know about it, and I'll take you through the verbal question types that you'll see. And then Roger's going to take you through some of the awesome graphing tricks on Desmos, which is the included calculator that they give you with the computer software. All right, so there we are. I'm Jamie.
And I'm
We
Roger.
have Roger with longer hair. So we're going to talk about College Board and Khan Academy. College Board is obviously the company that makes the SAT. The best way currently to practice is their own software. They call it the Blue Book software. And it has 4 full digital tests that are adaptive. Khan Academy is their official partner, and they also have some good practice resources. And then we're going to talk about the verbal section, math section, Desmos, and then we'll give you guys plenty of time for questions and answers. So, as I was saying, College Board developed its own software for this. It's called the Blue Book software. If you are planning to take the SAT, I would highly recommend getting out in front of this and downloading the Blue Book software ASAP, because it is on you to make sure that it works with your computer system. Offhand, I know that Chromebooks do not work with it. So if you were planning to take it on a Chromebook, you're going to have to figure out a different means. If you do not have a device that is compatible with the Blue Book software, you either need to get yourself a device, or you can apply for one through the school, which is a process that takes weeks, possibly months. So definitely something to get started looking at now. Another note about the Blue Book software is that they say it's your responsibility to make sure that it is updated before test day. So if you are planning to take it in May or June this year, make sure that you check before you go in that there weren't any updates that you missed. On the Blue Book software, they have those 4 digital practice tests. They are fully adaptive. This test is section-based adaptive, which means that everybody taking the test on a given day gets the same math section to start and the same verbal section to start. There are 2 verbal sections and 2 math sections, as there are in the current paper test. And the second verbal section is adaptive to your first section. So if you do well on the first section, you get into the harder set of second questions. If you struggle on the first verbal section, you get set into the easier set of verbal questions for the second set. Same thing happens on the math. If you do well on the first set, you'll get the harder second set. If you do poorly on the first set, you'll get an easier second set. It is not fully adaptive, I guess, in the sense that there are only 2 possibilities for the second section. So you're either in the higher level second section or the lower level second section. Khan Academy is still the official partner of College Board and has some good resources up. Very limited, but a growing number of verbal resources. Until 2 weeks ago, they only actually had 44 practice questions, which is 1 test worth. They just increased that 3-fold. So now they have 3 practice tests worth of questions, and they're broken up by difficulty and question type. So definitely very useful practice if you're getting ready for the test. Khan Academy has a ton of math resources, primarily because they rolled them all over from the current paper test. So for anybody who's studying for the paper test, the nicest thing to know is that the math content tests all of these same topics. So anything that you have learned for the current paper test is going to still benefit you when you switch over to the digital test. The verbal section is not so much the same. So let's talk about why. In the verbal section, the old SAT was broken into 1 reading section, 1 writing and language section, which tested grammar. And both of those were broken into individual passages. So current paper test has 5 passages of reading, 4 passages of grammar. Those don't exist anymore, and they don't break the sections by reading versus grammar. So both question types are in each section. The sections are shorter, there's fewer questions, they don't take as long, and it's still on the same scoring scale. So instead of having 52 questions for the reading and 44 questions for the grammar, you're just going to have 2 sections of 27 questions. They're still scored on the 200 to 800 scale, but because it's only been given once for real on a large scale, it's not really clear how demanding the scales are going to be in comparison to the current test. The content of the questions has also changed. The verbal section always starts with vocab questions now, where they give you one sentence and they want you to pick the word that best fits the meaning that they're going for in the sentence. It then goes into reading comprehension questions, which are a bit more familiar. However, like we said, there's no long passages, so they'll give you a short passage and give you a question about like, what's the main idea? Logical reasoning, if anybody's looked at an LSAT, it's basically the same as the LSAT questions. Grammar, so that's a nice one. Anything that you've been working on for the current test in terms of grammar is going to be tested again on the digital test, so that carries over well. Same thing with transitions, that's referring to questions about transition words and phrases. And then the last question is completely new. I call it bullet point synthesis. I'm going to actually take you through some of the question types, so you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. In terms of the math section, I'll quickly go through the differences, and then after we go through the verbal question types, Roger will take you through Desmos. In the old SAT, you had a no calc section and then the calc section. That doesn't exist anymore. The calculator is allowed throughout the entire test, and they give you Desmos, which is a fantastic graphing calculator tool. As with the verbal, shorter sections, fewer questions. There's only 22 questions per section, so 44 questions total. It's the same scoring scale, 200 to 800. And as I mentioned, Desmos calculator is integrated into it. The really nice thing about the content is that the topics are all the same. The focus has shifted a bit. They ask more about plane geometry and trigonometry than they did on the paper test. So make sure that you're brushing up on SOHCAHTOA and pi r squared and 2 pi r and other fun equations like that. And they're also focusing more on polynomial and exponential functions. So you need to be very familiar with how exponential functions and polynomial functions behave and what their graphs indicate. So Roger will take you through those tricks in a minute, but before he does, I'm going to show you the verbal question types. Okay. So vocab, I won't make you guys answer these questions right now. We won't have to talk about, how to approach them. But if you guys are reading these along with us and you have questions about them, please go ahead and just put them into the chat box and we'll go back through them when we get into the Q&A section. So vocab always has the same question stem. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? So anytime you see that phrasing, it is a vocab question. Reading comprehension has a few different question stems. As I mentioned before, probably the most popular is to state the main idea of the text. All of the texts are very short passages now compared to the current form. So in terms of structure, you can't just look to the end for the main idea anymore. You do have to actually read it in its entirety and think about how it all fits together. Another reading comprehension question stem, identifying the function of an underlined sentence. So they'll ask you how that relates to the rest of the passage. Another fun reading comprehension task. They give you two short passages and ask how one of those passages would respond to the other. Logical reasoning, like I mentioned, it's very similar to the logical reasoning section of the LSAT. So you see questions about how to strengthen or weaken somebody's conclusion, or how to form a proper conclusion out of a set of information. So they have a few ways that they'll present this. They give you a set of text and ask you how to support a hypothesis. Here, they'll ask you how to properly illustrate a claim. This is also a unique question because it's giving you lines from a poem, which is something that did not exist on the paper-based version of the test. There is poetry involved in the reading comprehension and the logical reasoning questions now. And then they also involve these quantitative analysis questions, which for anybody who is taking the current form of the test should look very familiar. These are the questions that they sprinkle throughout the reading comprehension passages and the writing and language passages, since they think you don't get enough math on the math sections, I guess. I don't know. But in this case, they ask you again to either support or weaken somebody's claim. So in this piece of text, they'll give you somebody making some sort of argument, hypothesis, statement, and then they'll ask you either to find data that helps back that up or defeats that. Grammar. They always give the same stem of the question now, which is which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. That is a very fancy way of just asking which of these is grammatically correct. And so the topics that are in the grammar, like we said, same as on the current paper-based version of the test. So if you've been studying hard with punctuation and subject-verb agreement and modifiers, all of those things are going to be useful for you still. Transitions. As I said, this is something that is also already on the paper-based version of the test, but instead of being in the context of a longer passage, when you sometimes need to think about more than just the two sentences that are around the transition, now we're just given this very contained piece of text. All you have to do is read the sentence that starts, read the sentence that finishes it, and think about what the relationship is, what best links them. And then there's this new unique type of question that I've called bullet point synthesis, where they give you a list of facts in a series of 5 bullet points, and then they give you some sort of goal that they want you to complete. In this case, they say, the student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two works. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? So if we want to emphasize a similarity, we then will read the bullet points and try to find a similarity between some two works that they're talking about. So Maikai Tubbs is a native Hawaiian sculptor and installation artist. I don't even see 2 works yet. His work has been shown in a bunch of places, still nothing about 2 works or similarities. Many of his sculptures feature discarded objects. Maybe that's a similarity. More specifically, erasure includes discarded audio cassette tapes and magnets. His work Homegrown includes discarded pushpins, plastic plates, and forks and wood. So if we're looking for a similarity, it's going to be something about these discarded objects. And so A, erasure uses discarded objects such as audio cassette tapes and magnets. Homegrown, however, includes pushpins, plastic plates, and forks and wood. That one does actually mention discarded objects. The however makes it wrong because we are trying to emphasize similarity. And so B is our real answer here. Like many of Tubbs's sculptures, both erasure and Homegrown include discarded objects. Erasure uses audio cassette tapes and Homegrown uses plastic forks. Notice that I started with the stem of the question and then looked at the bullet points. I think that that's a much more efficient way for going through these questions than to start by trying to read and analyze the bullet points. Because as you guys saw, a lot of them you don't really have to spend time thinking about. They're not relevant to what the person's goal is. And so that's all of the new verbal question types. And like I said, they have 2 verbal sections. If you do well on the first one, you get put into the higher second one. In both the verbal and the math sections now, there are always 2 experimental questions. So this version of the test has shortened the actual scored version of the test from about 3 hours to about 2 hours. But on top of that, it's gotten rid of the experimental section that they used to include at the end of the test. So for anybody who's taken the actual paper-based version, you've probably had the unfortunate experience of getting to the end and being told that you still have to take another section, even though it doesn't count. Instead of doing that to try out their new questions, now there will be 2 questions in every section that do not count towards your score, but you will have no way of knowing which they are. So it's kind of reassuring if you feel completely stumped by something. You just got to cross your fingers and hope that it's one of those questions that don't count at all. So that's my side of the presentation. Roger, if you want to talk through some fun stuff about Desmos, that would be great.
Sure. So I sort of expected to see everyone's faces in our presentation, but can't. So I was going to also start off by going through some of the questions that were provided and just describe to anyone who's listening. If you type the chat button underneath, you can actually ask a question right now. If you type it right in, if you thought of something while Jamie was speaking and you don't want it to forget it, you can type it right in and we can all see it, I think. And the first question that was posted to us sort of seems relevant to me. If you're talking about managing time in both the verbal and in the math section, since Jamie walked through the generic differences between the old math section and the new math section, one of the things that is no longer part of the test is the discussion that the proctor gives you before they start the clock. As soon as the clock starts on the College Board website, and this is all the more reason for you, if you're planning to take the digital test, if you're international, to download the software and to run through it to see what it looks like. Because the instructions that seem very tedious when someone's reading them to you 4 times per test, fill in your bubbles heavy and dark and so forth, are sort of pop up right when you open up your test and you're tempted to start reading them, but the clock's already running. So if you haven't already read those ahead of time, you're killing time right at the beginning by reading the instructions. Another thing is the Desmos calculator, which is provided for you within the software, and also the formula sheet, which shows up at the beginning of every math section, has a bunch of nice common formulas that you want to be familiar with. And you have to sort of know where to tag it. You have to click on it to look at it, and then click on it to sync it again. And so if the first day is the real day you're taking the SAT, and this is the time you're learning this and figuring it out, you're going to be wasting time. The math section is, as Jamie said, very, very similar to how it's always been. It's the same old SAT with the same old math questions that they've always asked. The predominant focus of the SAT is on linear and quadratic functions. I would say that over the past 3 years, there have just been more and more linear and quadratic functions and systems, and that tends to be the oldest math in your memory banks. If I'm speaking to students, if I'm speaking to parents, that's in the stone ages of your memory, so there's no chance that you're going to remember how to find the slope of a line. So there's a fair amount of 7th, 8th freshman year math that accounts for somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of the test. So initial review of generic functions is important because you're going to be tempted to want to solve these by hand, write them all out like you've been told. Another thing is you got to bring scratch paper because you used to have a little bit of space to work. And if you don't have paper in front of you, you're going to be at a disadvantage. I think in general, the College Board has been a little bit lazy about the way that they provided and presented all of this new material that they've got. It's not an awful lot. So I have a feeling that it's a bit of a moving target. And as Jamie just said, I haven't seen the new verbal questions that came up on Khan Academy, but the Khan Academy math section has been around for years and it hasn't changed much. It's the same videos and the same everything. It's great resources, but the videos are a bit dry and boring. The biggest innovation, I guess, in the digital test is that they allow you to use what's called the Desmos calculator. And I guess I should pull it up and show it to anyone if you haven't seen this before. It's kind of like a graphing calculator. If you have a graphing calculator at home, you don't need to use their Desmos graphing calculator. How does this look, Jamie? Okay.
I see it. Yeah, it looks good to me.
It does, yeah, because I can't just share that one screen and then also right on top of it. I was going to prepare a bunch of different questions, but to go through a boring series of linear and quadratic and exponential and polynomial functions seems way less interesting than showing you how this website, 3x plus 5 equals 7, will literally provide the answer to your algebra. Your answer is 0.667 and it solved it for you. And I don't necessarily see how this is beneficial to the determination as to who is better at mathematics than the next student. But nevertheless, the College Board has gone out of their way to provide this infinitely powerful software to everyone to use. So for anyone I've got that's taking the digital SAT, I am very focused on practicing and teaching the use of this computer program instead of the generic graphing calculator, if you've ever seen one, because it's smoother, it's better. It'll solve a system of equations for you. You can plot two at the same time. And this sort of math where you find a point of intersection can be tedious. There's lots of mistakes when you set this up algebraically and write it down with your pencils. When on the Desmos calculator, all you have to do is hover over the point of intersection and, first of all, know that the solution to a system of equations is this point of intersection. And if you type it wrong, there's no typing it again. You can just scroll out, zoom in, slide around, and now we can see that this system of equations has no solution and no point of intersection. Furthermore, a very common type of problem that's becoming more and more common using on the SAT, on the newer SATs, especially the digital SATs, is when they introduce an additional variable, such as C. When you plug in a C into this equation, it makes the problem from what used to be an algebraic system of equations where you would write it down and solve for your X and solve for your Y to a logic problem where there might be an infinite number of C's that would make this solution true, but out of your 4 multiple choice answers, which one is the one that falls within that range? And so this feature where you can add a slider, which nobody really knows about until you've practiced Desmos and gotten good, is you can set this up and you can actually move your function with this variable. And when you find this point of intersection right here, now you know that my value of C equals 1.3. That might be the one I'm looking for. Or if it's a range like an inequality larger than 1.3, smaller than 1.3, and you can sort of edit the whole function, which is, again, infinitely more powerful than your standard graphing calculator and what you can do with it. Besides that, there is a wide range of functions, and that's shown right here in this functions catalog. So if you are studying on your own, this little keyboard button over here, if you don't know what that is, you won't find your exponents, you won't find your parentheses and your absolute values and your square roots. And you won't find this functions button, which shows all your trigonometric functions, all your inverse trigonometric functions, and then a couple of really clever statistics, because one of the things that's a little bit tedious about the old SAT and in a standard graphing calculator is that to find mean, median, mode, and especially standard deviation is a very hidden part of your graphing calculator. It's in there, you can type a list, but it's a little tedious. Not everyone knows how to do it if they've never taken a statistics class. But here, when you click mean, oops, wrong one. When you start a new function first, and then you click mean, you can literally just add whichever numbers you want, separated by commas, and it will calculate the average for you. In a long list of numbers, this is way, way faster than starting a list in your graphing calculator. And furthermore, learning all of the different functions in your graphing calculator that are statistics, that are in your statistics button. Most people don't even know where those are, but here it's written straight for you. You can do first and second quartiles. You can break it all apart if you learn what these titles mean first off, and then if you learn how to use them into this, it gives you this, I don't know, a way higher percentage of questions that can be solved using Desmos on the SAT than previously. So I would say this is the biggest deal for the new SAT, is learning how, when you used to solve things algebraically the way your teacher told you, you're now learning to solve them using technology. And that seems to be the shift, as far as I can tell, with College Board's mentality toward the math. There are a ton of questions that are available, or that are being written, that were written for the new digital SAT, that appear to be one way, but if you know how to use Desmos to solve them, they appear much, much easier on this, on the back end. So there are tons of tutorial videos for Desmos if you're learning this on your own. Go to YouTube or Google, and you can find pretty much a in-depth rundown of how to do everything, from normal distribution to calculus to limits to pretty much all of these features, even least common multiple and greatest common factor. The mod program, the statistics functions for permutations and combinations are all right there. So it's like this program does everything your graphing calculator does, and the only glitch is, can you do it faster on Desmos than you can in your standard graphing calculator? Which one's better for you? So ultimately, rather than solve a bunch of math problems, I feel like the questions that were provided into the prior to our meeting were great, but do we know whether they can actually type in a question right now? Anyone who's listening who knows how to type in a question, just show me that it actually works, because our presentation doesn't look like
no, they can. There's a Q&A box. So for anybody who typed in questions before, I saw a few good ones. I typed in answers while Roger was speaking. So if you're waiting on an answer to your question, go ahead and check in the box.
See, how come I don't see the box then, James? So you're telling me you said the answer. So, you know, one of the questions was, when is the change going to happen? Which I thought was a great question. And it's already happened for international students. But I don't see that. Hello, Nurali. Can we hear you?
Nurali, you have a question?
Yeah, no. So I'm reading, I think you said January. I think I read online March, as I was listening to you speak about this.
March is the first large, like, widespread testing date, but it's available starting in January for tests given in school. So like the first official test date that they gave it for international students was it just passed in March, but we had students take it in January through their school day testing. So if anybody doesn't know what that is, there's testing that's done in schools during school days that is different from the testing that they do on the weekends on Saturdays that's open to the public. So for example, I live in Connecticut. It's mandated by the state that everybody takes the SAT during high school. So there's a separate day in March in Connecticut that is set aside for all of the people who are in high school to be taking the SAT, or all the people who are juniors in high school to be taking the SAT.
Just a quick question. I'm so sorry.
Mhm.
Now the PSAT that I know my daughter will have to take sometime, I forget when now, as a junior, which will count for National Merit Scholarship, NIMSQUat, right? Um, is that going to be digital or is that still going to be
It is.
paper?
And yeah, I should have mentioned that. That's a great question. The PSAT is actually switching over this fall. I think they're using that as sort of a crash test dummy for the actual test, just to make sure that they can iron out any
That's
issues
kind
that
of
they have.
unfair. I'm so sorry. Because my daughter's going to be junior and we're slogging over the summer and she's going to be taking paper tests in August, making sure, she does really well on that. And now all these other changes, which she has no clue how to go about.
Okay, so is she taking the real paper test in August?
Yeah, we're going to sign up as the minute it opens up.
Yeah, so it is unfair to your daughter and to other people who are on that same timeline. I would agree. I have, sophomores right now who will be rising juniors who have already been studying for the paper-based test and are taking it, either in June or in August. The reality is that they have to get the score that they want on the paper-based test by December, or that test is not going to exist anymore. And if they want to feel prepared and ready for the PSAT, then they have to also take digital tests as practice to get ready for that. So I agree with you, it is unfair, but I didn't set the rules. So.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this. This is really good and helped me out ton.
Oh, of course. And if you guys have any questions that you think of after the session, please feel free to reach out by email. I'll always get back to you.
Can you anyway share the slides of the questions you presented?
Yes, absolutely. Let me bring those back up.
I'll add too that this whole webinar is going to be recorded as well. So if any of you want to watch this back or, zoom in on certain parts that were shown at some point, we will have the recording up on our website starting tomorrow, and we'll send you guys the link so you can take a look at it anytime.
I really appreciate that.
Okay, cool. Was there a particular question you wanted to look at or had a question about?
No, the one before you said logical reasoning, I skipped that one somehow.
Oh, okay. Before logical reasoning, I had a series of reading comprehension questions. So this first one was asking about the main idea. I would say that's the most popular question stem that they've had for reading comprehension. Next one was asking about the function of one sentence within a paragraph. Also a very popular question stem. And then the last one was this comparison passage setup where they ask how one passage would respond to the other. Not that many of these. It seems like each test has about one of these. So if you hate doing the comparison passages, you don't have to be terrified of this.
And a quick question, sorry. What about the timing on each section?
Oh, that's a great question also. So in terms of time per question, and let me try to bring this up. Time per question and time per section. You have more time per question and less time per section. So in terms of timing, they intend for it to be, I think, a little bit more forgiving. So I'll show you on this table here. Digital test for math, you get 95 seconds per question as opposed to 83 on the current version of the test. And you get 71 seconds per verbal question as opposed to 62 on the current version of the test. I do think that the timing on the verbal portion of the digital test is a little bit tricky, just because they give you a new unique piece of text to read for every single question. Whereas on the current version, even though you have those very long, annoying passages to read, at that point, once you've read it, you can answer 10 questions in a row off of that piece. Whereas with this one, you have to read something new every single time. Okay. Looks like we've got another one. Where is the test going to be taken, at home or just like it used to be? That's also a fantastic question. In my opinion, they should let you take it at home, but they will not. So you still have to go to a testing center or to your high school. For most people, it will be at your high school or a local high school. And if you don't have a device, your school is supposed to provide you with one, but a lot of schools don't have those devices. A lot of schools use Chromebooks as the devices that they have for students. So make sure that if you do not have a device that's compatible with Blue Book, that you reach out to your school immediately and find out if they have one for you. Okay.
And that's an important one. A student of mine in Brazil was signed up and got to the school, and even though they had signed up for a digital test, there were not enough seats. Maybe a computer broke and they thought they had enough seats when they put it in, and it was just the student was told, sorry, you can't take the test today, there is no spot for you. This was for when the digital ACT switched over, but I anticipate a lot of the same problems. You know, when it used to be a paper copy, all they needed was a big stack of papers and they could hand them out to everyone. And now they need a seat and a computer space for everyone who's registered to take the test on that day. And I anticipate the spots will fill up faster, so register early. And also, if you're bringing your own device, is definitely going to be an interesting question for, especially with respect to the lockdown browser. Anyone else have any questions?
Okay, so we had a few questions that were sent in beforehand. One you kind of answered. I think you did a good job of answering it for the most part. How to manage our time in a better way with the new digital SAT. One other point that I would make about that is just that you should know these timings per question, because every single question is now its own entity. So I think that managing time on the paper-based version is a little bit easier in terms of the verbal sections, especially because with the reading comprehension, you have 5 discrete passages, 65 minutes with regular time. So you know immediately you get 13 minutes for each of those passages. This one doesn't work out that way because you don't have those passages. So you have to be able to sort of build that internal clock of, all right, I'm going past a minute. I'm getting really close to that 71 seconds that I'm allotted for this. I got to start moving myself forward. One thing that you should also know, though, about the verbal sections that I think is, I don't know if it's mean of them, but it seems deceptive. The question types at the beginning, because you start off with the vocab and the reading comprehension and logical reasoning, tend to take a lot longer than the ones at the end. I would say that the grammar and transition questions tend to be the fastest for most of my students. So it frequently will feel like you're behind the time. And if you're looking at like the pace on a clock, you might be behind the time. But for a lot of students, you'll be able to make that up in the second half of the questions. Let's see. Okay, another question that we had was, when is the change going to happen? I think we answered that in the Q&A. Another good question, how do you prepare for the new test? So definitely not as easy as it is with the current version. With the paper-based tests, there's about 30 or so tests that have been either released publicly by the College Board or leaked online through shady sources that will post them nicely on Reddit and other websites. So there's a lot of material that comes from the College Board that is useful for the paper-based version. For the digital tests, like I said, there's only 4 full adaptive tests that the College Board has released. So you need to be careful in terms of your preparation to leave some of those for close to when you're taking the real test. So for example, if you know that you want to start studying now, but you're not planning to take the real test until October, you do not want to burn through all 4 of those tests, this spring and early in the summer, and then have no real adaptive College Board created tests to take at the end. So I would start with those Khan Academy resources. There's also the 4 linear tests that the College Board has released, which are not a good simulation of the actual test taking. For some reason, they didn't even include the correct number of questions per section, but they are also obviously not adaptive because they are just a paper copy of a test. But they are great practice in terms of the actual content, how they're going to word the questions, things like that. Outside of that, there are companies that have started to make their own digital testing platforms. Logic Prep actually has our own digital testing platform. So for our international students, if you've been preparing for the ACT, hopefully you've taken some of those digital ACT practice tests with us. If not, then you need to get to work. But very shortly, we will be ready to launch our digital SAT testing platform. So we will digitize the linear tests from the College Board, and we'll be coming up with a few of our own proprietary tests to practice with. If you're looking for other resources, I can tell you that
the College Board hasn't published one, that we can tell you. The last College Board Blue Book, which used to have the official tests that you could go purchase at a Barnes and Noble if you're a dinosaur like myself, was 2020, I'm gonna say. And now with this whole update, it's gone like kind of entirely digital. So I can't wait till the new book gets released, but wouldn't you think they would time it around the same time as they did the international? They would have sold 1 million books,
It's it's very nebulous. They have not released when they will add more digital practice tests, if it ever or at all. They did not release the actual questions from the March test, which is technically something they have always done for the March international tests. And they haven't said whether they're going to release actual questions from the tests that they start to give to the United States. So the QAS service, which is the question and answer service, which is how you would always see your actual test questions that you missed, is not part of the testing currently with the digital test. But if you're looking for more ways to take practice tests digitally, like I said, we'll have our own testing platform very soon. But currently you can find some through Barron's and Kaplan. In all honesty, I haven't checked out the Barron's ones. The Kaplan ones are not particularly accurate to the College Board. So, buyer beware when you're doing that. But yeah, the best resources are still going to be the ones that come from the College Board. So unfortunately, we just have to be patient with those and try to, like I said, spread them out and make sure that you're leaving some for close to your actual real test.
Question from the board: if you will be a senior next school year, what should be the latest date you should take the test? The test is being administered this May, June. It depends if you're international, the exact test dates, but if you are trying to get your application in for an early decision versus a regular decision, that would change the last date you could take the test. The October SAT will make it to early decision. Correct me if I'm wrong, Olivia, but the October test date next year is the last date where your scores will make it to your ED application, which usually goes in around the beginning of November. The December test date usually gets you by regular decision, January 1st. Is that right, James?
Yeah, as far as I know, the regular test date does count for regular, or the December test date does
December.
count for regular decision. It definitely does not count for early decision.
No way for early decision. So October, to whomever asked that question, would be probably the best one, unless you're not EDing, and then December.
Another question we had from before the webinar was, it wasn't really posed as a question, just ACT versus SAT. If I'm going to be totally honest, I would recommend that people take the ACT right now instead of the SAT. Transitions between testing formats historically have been pretty rocky. However, I did have a handful of students who took the March digital SAT, and the scores were pretty impressive. The scales, however, have not really fully been developed. As of the end of 2022, the College Board released a statement saying that they hadn't finished running their concordance tests and their validity tests on the new digital version of the test. So it's not really clear whether the scales that were given to that first group in March are going to be at all similar to the scales that you'll find if you take it, you know, in a few weeks in May or further on down the line. So it's a lot of unpredictability right now with the SAT. For example, also the practice tests in the Blue Book and the linear tests that the College Board has released have vocab questions that most of my students have found pretty straightforward and manageable. But I heard from all of my students who took it in January and March that the vocab that they saw on the real test was significantly harder. So one of my students remembered seeing words like buttressed and evinced in vocab questions. Those harken back to the days when dinosaurs like Roger and I took the test and you actually had to study vocab for it. So
Study lots of vocab.
yeah, so there are some big question marks. The students that I'm working with right now for this test, I'm having study vocab, but it sort of remains to be seen what parts of the test and what topics they're really going to focus in on and try to challenge students with. So as a result, I would probably lean toward taking the ACT if you're sort of on the fence between those two tests.
If the SAT is feeling lugubrious, perhaps you should take the ACT. Lugubrious was my favorite one, I think.
That was a good one. My favorite is still neophyte. So if you're a neophyte in this process, then I would lean toward taking the ACT. So you don't need to study what neophyte and lugubrious mean.
Yeah, us millennials and Gen Xers call that a noob.
So thank you guys all so much for coming. It's been great hanging out, and hopefully we'll see you guys again soon.
Have a great day.